What happens when one of Hollywood's most laid-back actors walks into one of television's most heated talk shows and refuses to play by the rules? The answer is a confrontation that nobody saw coming, and a moment of television that had audiences picking sides before the commercial break even hit. Before we get into this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on in this debate. Because trust me, you're going to have an opinion by the end of this. Matthew McConaughey walked onto the set of The View with that signature relaxed stride of his, the kind that makes you think nothing could possibly ruffle this man. The audience gave him the warm welcome you'd expect for an Oscar winner, and the panel of hosts smiled as he settled into the guest chair. But within minutes, what started as a standard celebrity interview transformed into something else entirely, something that would have people talking for days afterward. Joy Behar opened with what seemed like a simple enough question. She asked Matthew about his recent comments regarding political division in America, comments he had made during a podcast interview where he suggested that both sides of the political spectrum needed to find more common ground. It was a reasonable topic, the kind of thing that gets discussed on The View every single day. But the way Joy framed it made it clear she wasn't looking for a simple answer. She leaned forward, and there was an edge to her voice when she said, "You've been talking a lot about unity and bringing people together, but don't you think that some positions are just morally wrong? Don't you think there's a point where we have to stop pretending both sides have equal merit?" Matthew nodded slowly, taking in the question. He had that thoughtful look on his face, the one that makes you wait for what he's about to say because you know it's been carefully considered. He responded by saying that he thinks the problem with that kind of thinking is that it shuts down conversation before it even starts. He said that the moment you decide someone is morally wrong, you stop listening to them. And when you stop listening, you stop understanding. And when you stop understanding, you've lost any chance of finding real solutions. Joy wasn't having it. She came back quickly, asking him if he really thought we should be trying to understand people who hold dangerous views, people who deny science, people who want to roll back rights that others have fought for. Her voice had risen slightly, and you could feel the energy in the studio shift. The other hosts were watching carefully, and the audience had gone quiet in that way audiences do when they sense something interesting is about to happen. Matthew took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was still calm, but there was a firmness to it that hadn't been there before. He said, "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You just put everyone who disagrees with you into one box and labeled them as dangerous. You didn't ask me who specifically I was talking about. You didn't ask me what I meant by understanding. You just assumed the worst possible interpretation of what I said and ran with it." The tension was immediate. Joy's face showed surprise, the kind of surprise you see when someone isn't used to being challenged directly on their own show. She started to respond, but Matthew kept going. He said that this is what happens everywhere now, on cable news, on social media, in living rooms across the country. People hear something they don't like, and instead of asking questions or trying to understand the nuance, they attack. They assume bad faith. They create strawman versions of arguments so they can knock them down more easily. Joy tried to interrupt, saying that she wasn't attacking him, she was just asking a question. But Matthew shook his head, and for the first time since sitting down, he leaned forward in his chair. He said, "No, you weren't asking a question. You were making a statement disguised as a question. There's a difference. A real question seeks to understand. What you did was set up a trap. And when I didn't fall into it, you're acting like I'm the one being difficult." One of the other hosts, trying to defuse the situation, jumped in to say that everyone was just trying to have an honest conversation. Matthew turned to her and said he appreciated that, but that honest conversations require honest questions. He said that he came on the show expecting to talk about his work, his foundation, the things he's passionate about. But instead he walked into what felt like an interrogation designed to make him defend positions he doesn't even hold. Joy, clearly frustrated now, said that maybe the problem was that he wasn't being clear about what his positions actually were. She said that when public figures talk about unity and both sides, it often feels like they're sitting on the fence, trying to please everyone and standing for nothing. She asked him directly, "What do you—" The audience was completely silent now. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked fascinated. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Matthew wasn't finished. He said that he believes in compassion. He believes in justice. He believes in truth. And he believes in the dignity of every human being. He said those beliefs inform everything he does. But he also believes that the way we're talking to each other right now as a culture is toxic. He said that we've created an environment where admitting you might be wrong is seen as weakness, where changing your mind is seen as betrayal, where asking questions is seen as aggression. Joy shot back, saying that some things aren't up for debate. She listed several hot-button issues, asking if those were things we should just agree to disagree about. Matthew responded by saying that he wasn't suggesting we agree to disagree about everything, but that we need to be able to discuss difficult things without immediately questioning each other's character. He said there's a difference between disagreeing with someone's position and deciding they're a bad person. Another host tried to offer a middle ground, suggesting that maybe both of them were saying similar things in different ways. But Joy shook her head, saying she didn't think they were similar at all. She said that Matthew's approach sounded nice in theory, but in practice, it gave cover to people who wanted to avoid taking real stands on important issues. She said that neutrality in the face of injustice is itself a form of injustice. Matthew leaned back in his chair, and you could see him processing what she'd just said. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but somehow more powerful. He said, "I never said I was neutral. Neutrality means you don't care. I care deeply. But what I'm not willing to do is demonize half the country because they see things differently than I do. What I'm not willing to do is assume that everyone who disagrees with me is evil, or stupid, or brainwashed. What I'm not willing to do is give up on the idea that we can find common ground if we actually try." Joy asked him what common ground he thought existed on issues where one side wants to expand rights and the other wants to restrict them. Matthew paused, and you could tell he was choosing his words carefully. He said that he thinks most people, regardless of their politics, want similar things. They want safety for their families. They want opportunities for their children. They want to be treated with respect. They want to feel like their voice matters. He said the problem is that we've been conditioned to see those basic human desires as political rather than universal. Joy wasn't buying it. She said that sure, everyone wants those things in the abstract. But when you get down to specifics, people have fundamentally different ideas about how to achieve them. And some of those ideas cause real harm to real people. She asked how you find common ground with someone whose idea of safety means your idea of danger. Matthew acknowledged that was a fair point, but he said that's exactly why conversation matters. He said you don't find common ground by staying in your corner and yelling across the room. You find it by sitting down, by listening even when it's uncomfortable, by asking yourself if there's any possibility at all, that you might not have the complete picture. He said that doesn't mean abandoning your principles. It means being confident enough in your principles that you can defend them without resorting to name-calling or dismissal. Joy leaned forward, her voice sharp now. She said, "Okay, let me ask you this. If someone comes to you and says they believe certain people shouldn't have the same rights as others, what's the conversation there? What's the middle ground? Do we give them half the rights?" Matthew shook his head and said, "That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it. I'm talking about the fact that we've stopped trying to understand why people believe what they believe. We've stopped asking what experiences shaped their worldview. We've stopped treating disagreement as an opportunity to educate rather than an opportunity to destroy." Joy shot back, "I don't need to understand why someone is a bigot." Matthew raised his voice for the first time, not shouting, but firm enough that everyone noticed. He said, "And that right there is the problem. You just called someone a bigot without even knowing who we're talking about. You've created a hypothetical person in your mind, assigned them the worst possible motivations, and now you're arguing against that figment of your imagination, instead of engaging with what I'm actually saying." The studio felt charged now, like the air before a thunderstorm. Joy sat back, crossing her arms, and you could see she was regrouping. She said, "Fine, let's talk about real people then. Let's talk about the politicians who are actively working to restrict voting rights, who are banning books, who are attacking marginalized communities. Are those the people you want us to have compassionate conversations with? Matthew rubbed his face, and for a moment he looked tired. Not physically tired, but tired of having to explain the same point over and over. He said, "You're still doing it. You're still conflating the action with the person. I can condemn an action. I can fight against a policy. I can work to defeat legislation I think is harmful, all while still recognizing that the person on the other side is a human being who probably thinks they're doing the right thing. And before you jump in, no, that doesn't mean I think they are doing the right thing. It means I understand that demonizing them makes it impossible to ever reach the people who might be persuadable." Joy scoffed. She said, "Persuadable? Matthew, we're past persuasion. We're in a battle for the soul of this country. You can't persuade someone out of hatred with kind words and understanding." Matthew leaned forward again, his eyes locked on hers. He said, "So what's your solution? You want to fight? You want to keep ramping up the rhetoric? Keep dividing people into good and evil? Keep treating politics like a holy war? Because I'll tell you what that gets you. It gets you more polarization, more anger, more violence, and absolutely zero progress." Joy fired back, "And what does your approach get us? It gets us people like you sitting comfortably in the middle, preaching about civility, while real people are suffering from the policies you won't even take a firm stand against." Matthew's jaw clenched. He said, "I have taken stands. I've donated millions to causes I believe in. I've used my platform to advocate for things I care about. But I refuse to turn those stands into weapons against people. I refuse to believe that the only way to fight for what's right is to become cruel and dismissive toward anyone who doesn't immediately agree with me." One of the other hosts jumped in, trying to calm things down, asking Matthew if he could understand why people feel so passionate about these issues that civility sometimes feels like a luxury they can't afford. Matthew turned to her and his voice softened a bit. He said, "Of course I understand that. I understand the urgency. I understand the fear. I understand why someone would feel like there's no time for patience or understanding. But here's what I also understand. That urgency, that fear, it's being weaponized. It's being used to keep us at each other's throats because as long as we're fighting with each other, we're not looking at the systems and structures that are actually causing the problems." Joy jumped back in, saying that sounded like a convenient way to avoid talking about the actual people in power who are making harmful decisions. Matthew shook his head. He said, "It's not about avoiding anything. It's about being strategic. It's about recognizing that you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And before you roll your eyes at that cliché, think about it. Think about the people you've convinced to change their minds by calling them names. Think about the hearts and minds you've won over by telling them they're morally bankrupt. I'm going to guess that number is pretty close to zero." Joy's voice rose. She said, "I'm not trying to change the minds of people who are committed to hurting others. I'm trying to stop them." Matthew matched her energy. He said, "And how's that working out for you? Has all this outrage, all this anger, all this fighting, has it stopped them? Or has it just made them dig in deeper, made them more convinced that they're the victims, made them more likely to show up and vote and fight back twice as hard?" There was a moment of silence after that, heavy and uncomfortable. One of the other hosts tried to redirect, asking Matthew about his charity work, clearly hoping to move the conversation to safer ground. But Joy wasn't ready to let it go. She said, "I just want to understand something, Matthew. When you see injustice, when you see people being targeted and attacked, what's your first instinct? Is it to understand the attackers or to protect the victims?" Matthew looked at her for a long moment before responding. He said, "That's a false choice, and you know it. I can protect victims and still try to understand what drives people to become attackers. In fact, if I want to actually prevent future attacks, understanding is essential. You can't fight what you don't understand. You can't change what you refuse to engage with. And you can't build a better world by simply destroying everyone who disagrees with your vision of what that world should look like." Joy shook her head. She said, "Some visions don't deserve to be engaged with. Some ideas are just wrong, period." Matthew responded immediately. He said, "And who gets to decide which ideas fall into that category? You? Me? The mob on social media? The talking heads on cable news? The moment we decide that certain ideas are too dangerous to even discuss, we've given up on the entire premise of a free society. We've decided that we can't trust people to hear bad ideas and reject them, so we have to protect them by controlling what they're allowed to hear. Joy's response came fast. She said, so we should just let misinformation spread. We should just platform people who spread lies and hatred? Matthew sighed, a deep exhale that seemed to carry the weight of the entire conversation. He said there's a difference between platforming something and engaging with it. There's a difference between amplifying a message and examining it. And there's a massive difference between censoring ideas and challenging them with better ideas. What I'm afraid of is that we've become so obsessed with shutting people down that we've forgotten how to actually win arguments. Joy countered, saying that you can't win an argument with someone who isn't arguing in good faith. Matthew nodded. He said, you're right, you can't. But the conversation isn't really for them anyway. It's for everyone else who's watching. It's for the people who haven't made up their minds yet. It's for the people who are genuinely confused and looking for guidance. When those people see you responding to bad arguments with anger and dismissal, they don't see someone who's confident in their position. They see someone who's afraid to actually engage. And that makes them more likely to listen to the other side, not less. One of the other hosts asked if there was any point where Matthew thought confrontation was necessary. He said, absolutely. There are times when you have to stand up and say, no, this is unacceptable. This crosses a line. But those moments are actually more powerful when they're not constant. When everything is a 5-alarm fire, people stop responding to the alarm. They get numb to it. They tune it out. But when you've been measured and thoughtful and then suddenly you draw a hard line, people pay attention. They understand that this moment is different, that this actually matters. Joy asked him to give her an example of where he'd draw that hard line. Matthew thought for a moment and said, violence. Actual violence or direct incitement to violence. When someone crosses from speech into action that harms others, that's where conversation ends and consequences begin. But everything short of that, every bad idea, every offensive opinion, every ignorant statement, those are opportunities. Opportunities to educate, to challenge, to demonstrate why your way of thinking is better. Joy pressed him, asking if he really believed that education could fix the deep divisions in the country. Matthew said, I don't know if it can fix everything, but I know that writing people off guarantees it won't fix anything. I know that treating millions of people like they're beyond redemption creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. I know that if we can't find a way to talk to each other, to really talk to each other, not at each other, then we're headed somewhere dark. And I'm not willing to accept that as inevitable. The energy in the room had shifted. It wasn't less tense exactly, but it felt different somehow. More thoughtful, maybe. Joy looked at Matthew and said, you really believe all this, don't you? This isn't just talking points for you. Matthew smiled, and this time it was genuine. He said, I wouldn't be sitting here getting into it with you if I didn't believe it. It'd be a lot easier to just give you the answers you want to hear, to play it safe, to not rock the boat. But that's part of the problem too. Too many people say what they think they're supposed to say instead of what they actually think. And then we wonder why nothing ever changes. Joy sat back in her chair, and you could see her processing everything that had been said. She said, I still think you're being naive. I still think that there are people out there who will take advantage of your good faith and use it against you. Matthew nodded. He said, maybe I am naive. Maybe I'm wrong about all of this. But I'd rather be wrong trying to bring people together than be right about how irredeemably divided we are. Because if I'm right about that, if we really are past the point of no return, then what's the point of any of this? What are we even fighting for? Another host spoke up, saying that maybe both approaches had their place, that maybe some situations called for Matthew's philosophy, and others called for Joy's. Matthew said he could accept that he didn't claim to have all the answers. Joy, surprisingly, also nodded, though she added that she still thought Matthew was underestimating how bad things had gotten and how little patience people had left for trying to reason with unreasonable people. Matthew said, maybe so, but I've seen people change. I've seen people who held terrible views come around when someone took the time to actually engage with them as human beings. It doesn't happen overnight. It's messy and frustrating, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. But when it does work, when you actually reach someone, it's worth all the effort. And more than that, it's the only way forward that doesn't end in complete breakdown of society. Joy asked him what he would say to people who felt like they'd already tried his approach, and it hadn't worked. People who felt exhausted from always being the ones to extend olive branches that get slapped away. Matthew's voice was softer now. He said, "I'd tell them I understand. I'd tell them that it's okay to be tired. I'd tell them that they don't have to engage with everyone, that they can choose their battles, that they can step back and take care of themselves. But I'd also tell them not to give up on the idea that connection is possible, because the moment we all give up on that, we've lost something essential about what it means to be human." The conversation began to wind down. The hosts moved toward wrapping up the segment, though you could tell that none of them felt like anything had really been resolved. Matthew and Joy hadn't changed each other's minds. That much was clear. But something had happened in that exchange, something real and raw that you don't usually see on television. Two people with genuinely different views had gone head-to-head without backing down, without resorting to cheap shots.